Hello, and thank you very much. As was mentioned earlier, I am a radio presenter now for the BBC, and so therefore I've brought my comfort blanket today. And you are all part of an experiment in which I am recording a live radio program, or rather, I am recording a radio program that I am presenting live today, which I hope over the next 24 or so minutes is a delightful way to tell stories that incorporates sounds, songs, and certainly a voice that you have heard earlier today. So, without further ado, I'm a psychologist. This, of course, gives me license to watch people at parties and to nod mysteriously when you talk about your mother. But my real business? Mind control. My skills reach everywhere, from your living room to the Las Vegas Strip, from Disneyland to the movie theaters. I have the skills, the tools in my mind to make you buy, to make you believe, to make you desire. Unfortunately, you don't have much say in the matter, I'm sorry. You are infinitely suggestible, although you probably don't want to hear that. You probably think, for example, that you are less susceptible to suggestion than the person sitting to your right, or the person sitting to your left, or perhaps the really hot one that is sitting 2 rows in front of you. But I hate to break it to you, you are susceptible. You will fall to the power of suggestion. You are getting sleepy.
I mean, I feel more relaxed. I don't know, I feel more carefree, I guess, is the way to put it.
Okay.
I don't care about the camera, I don't care about you, I don't care about the light bulb either, but it hurts my eyes.
So, what are you experiencing? You look asleep. So when you fall forward, are you asleep then?
No, if I was asleep, I wouldn't talk.
Okay.
Ready?
It was the 1800s, and the place was Europe. People were hooked by a new consciousness ever since the modern medical science at the time had definitively made a split between the mind and the body. And hypnotism was the hot topic. It was a fad sweeping through the parlors of the well-to-do and across the stages of the big cities. Showmen like this guy here, Frank Anton Mesmer, thought it was a brilliant trick to put people and animals into a trance for laughs. Frank, his party trick, was something that he called mesmerism. Yes, after himself. And he claimed, this is what he claimed, I love this, that his charismatic and powerful gaze, his own personal powerful gaze, manipulated the magnetic fluid in his patients' bodies, and that was what put them into a deep, deep sleep. There was, however, another school of thought that was making the circuit, and one that was entirely rational and based on science.
Take any bright object, e.g. a lancet case, between the thumb and 4 and middle fingers of the left hand. Hold it from about 8 to 15 inches from the eyes at such a position above the forehead as may be necessary to produce the greatest strain upon the eyes and eyelids, and enable the patient to maintain a steady, fixed stare at the object.
This is James Braid. That's him. And those were his words, read by Ben Hammersley. James Braid was a surgeon in Scotland and thought that Mesmer's claims were absolute nonsense. And Braid's hobby was debunking people who he thought were full of shit.
The patient must be made to understand that he is to keep the eyes steadily fixed on the object and the mind riveted on the idea of that one object. it will be observed that owing to the consensual adjustment of the eyes, the pupils will be at first contracted. They will shortly begin to dilate, and after they have done so to a considerable extent and have assumed a wavy motion, if the fore and middle fingers of the right hand extended and a little separated are carried from the object towards the eyes, most probably the eyelids will close involuntarily with a vibratory motion.
After extensive experimentation, first on himself and then on other people, Braid determined that the trance state had actually nothing at all to do with magnetic fluids, but everything to do with fascination.
The explanation for the power that serpents have to fascinate birds is simply this: that when the attention of a man or animal is deeply engrossed or absorbed by a given idea associated with movement, a current of nervous force is sent into the muscles, which produces a corresponding motion, not only without any conscious effort or volition, but even in opposition to volition in many instances. And hence, they seem to be irresistibly drawn or spellbound according to the purport of the dominant idea or impression in the mind of each at the time.
You see, when you're in a trance, you are so concentrated, so focused and fascinated on a single thing that that is how you go deeply, deeply into yourself. And of course, it's there that we are at our most suggestible. Interestingly, James Braid's method is still used today by clinical hypnotists over 175 years later. And although Braid rejected the circus circuit, his eye fixation hypnotic induction method has been adopted by modern-day stage show hypnotists too. Very little about the technique has changed, except that it's been formalized into something that's called the Stanford Susceptibility Scale, Form C. Not very sexy. Now, if any of you have ever been hypnotized in a stage show in front of an audience, they're actually using Victorian-era techniques, and they're getting you to raise your arms and waggle them around and taste something sour and feel like you're covered in insects and cluck like a chicken when they pick up a pencil. And all of this is on the Stanford scale. Yeah, even the bit about regressing to an earlier age. But when we're in our deep, deep sleep, we're actually not play acting. We're actually participating there in that state in a way that Braid and his colleagues at the time didn't really get, but has never truly been understood until now. First of all, the attention areas of the brain are the bits here. For those who like completion, that's called the angular gyrus or gyrus. When you're hypnotized, the electrical impulses in that part are hyperactivated. So, in fact, just like James Braid said, something is actually happening in the attention areas of the mind. But there is another part of hypnosis beyond the trance. That, of course, is the suggestibility. It's what happens when you're there that makes the difference, whether it's for an audience watching or if you're trying to quit smoking. So, in 2000, a group of neuroscientists at Harvard University and the Massachusetts General Hospital in the United States were digging around for a neurobiological element to suggestion. So they hypnotized a bunch of people and suggested that they look at a painting, a very colorful one, a lot like Mondrian's here. And they suggested, while under hypnosis, that they see it in grayscale. The electrical impulses in the part of the brain that processes color before hypnosis were completely different from the electrical impulses under hypnosis in exactly the same part. So suggestion had worked its neurobiological magic. So, to recreate this, of course, the nature of science is that you have to replicate. Another group of neuroscientists from Lund University took a slightly different tack. They took some synesthetes, and they hypnotized them. Now, I don't know if you know this, but synesthetes are the people who can taste the color red, or they can hear the smell of mangoes. They normally have a pretty weird electro map up there. They're the ones who are on the left. While in the trance, the researchers asked the synesthetes, it's a really difficult word to say, and I've been practicing for days. The synesthetes, they asked them to stop smelling colors or stop hearing smells. And their brain electricity went back to something that resembled a normal brain. So something physical is very clearly happening up there. When you're in a trance, you're neurobiologically convinced about things that defy rationality. There is another thing that the Stanford Susceptibility Scale measures, and that's post-hypnotic suggestion. This is one of my favorite films, and I'm so excited that there's another one coming out soon. This trope here in the film Zoolander belies our greatest fear, that we are actually not in charge of our consciousness. We are a pawn in a larger story, and frankly, usually it's that we're some kind of skilled assassin ready to take over the world. We are convinced by the master hypnotist that we want to do what it is that they tell us to do. So, if we understand that we are in a trance and our neurobiology is focused on the attention, and of course, we have convinced ourselves neurobiologically that we want to see a colorful image in grayscale, or in fact that we are a skilled assassin, does that mean that we can plead not guilty and just say, hey, hypnosis made me do it? Sadly, no. The reason why Derek Zoolander and Major Bennett Marco from The Manchurian Candidate and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Total Recall and Sergeant Nicholas Brody from Homeland and all of the other films that have explored this idea have become skilled assassins is actually because they want to. They're intrinsically motivated to do so. Psychologists, like myself, know that it's almost impossible to get anyone to think or to do something that they don't want to think or do. Normally, to do or to think something that you don't want to, you have to be coerced or bullied. And usually, as soon as the pressure is off, you go back to how it was before. You just say, hey, that wasn't me, it was somebody else. So, given what we know about our neurobiology under a trance state, what is happening here? What kind of mind control did James Braid tap into? It turns out that what hypnotists do with their technique is to get you into a state where you want to do something or to see what it is that they suggest. You internally become motivated, intrinsically motivated to do it, but not, as I say, through coercion or bullying, but it's because you've decided that's what you want to do. I've been hypnotized. I was convinced, yeah, there's bugs crawling all over me. I know there aren't bugs crawling all over me, but I really want to pretend that there are bugs crawling all over me. I was intrinsically motivated. So in these situations, it's usually waggling your arms around in the air or seeing the audience naked. We're just going to leave that one there. Hold that thought for a second. This is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He's a psychologist, like myself, but perhaps an infinitely more successful one. He's an expert in happiness and what gives people joy, even when they're not getting rewarded, whether it's through money or fame or even a smile. They're getting nothing back. And he's spoken with thousands of people about their experiences, about what gives them great delight. Artists, top athletes, monks, musicians, rock climbers, writers, worker bees. Based on over 8,000 plus and ongoing stories, he's come up with his theory about how people work effectively. And as I mentioned, he's infinitely more successful than me because he sold millions of books worldwide, all about the same thing. It's about getting into a trance-like state so you can be the best possible you that you can be.
When you are really involved in this completely engaging process of creating something new, as this man does, he doesn't have enough attention left over to monitor how his body feels or his problems at home. He can't feel even that he's hungry or tired.
That's him in 2004 at TED describing a composer in the mental state that he calls flow.
His body disappears, his identity disappears from his consciousness because he doesn't have enough attention, like none of us do, to really do well something that requires a lot of concentration and at the same time to feel that he exists. So existence temporarily suspended.
Everybody in this room has been in flow. You've gone for a run and you've pushed through those first 2 painful miles. You've got lost in the waves when you're surfing. You've discovered that hours have passed when you're just sitting there simply stringing beads on a piece of string or stuffing envelopes or playing the piano. You're free from everything else. You're in the zone.
You know that what you need to do is possible to do even though difficult. And sense of time disappears, you forget yourself, you feel part of something larger.
In flow, you are so fixated on what you're doing that everything else evaporates. You're the bird fascinated by the serpent. Your internal magnetic fluids are dancing to the beat of Frank Mesmer's drum. And so this is starting to sound an awful lot like hypnotism. And in fact, there is a connection, but perhaps not as nefarious as you might think. In the early 2000s, a researcher named Brian Vasquez was a sports psychologist at the University of Washington. He was doing his PhD at the time. And he knew that top athletes, and we're talking about Olympic level here, when they were going for gold, they got into a flow state. And not only were they there, right there when they were competing, but that was actually the end game. That they were winning, well, it was just a perk. Vasquez figured that their peak performance was enhanced by being in the zone, that they did better when they were in flow than they would otherwise. But
if the state of flow is such a positive experience for an athlete or dancer or artist, why do people not enter this state when they want the desired effects? Therein lies the problem. It cannot be completely controlled and cannot be switched on and off at will. And like the ever-elusive fountain of youth, the secrets for achieving this realm upon command have yet to be discovered.
Shit. But Vasquez thought that he might have a key. If flow is so similar to hypnotism's trance state, what if he hypnotized them and suggested that they regress to a previous state in which they were experiencing flow? To test this, he recruited 48 top basketball players from a US university, and he tested their dribbling, their defense, and their three-point performance. And then he either gave them relaxation techniques, or he hypnotized them and asked them to regress to a previous state of flow. And then he tested them again.
The results of this study suggested that participants receiving the hypnosis intervention were able to demonstrate significantly higher all-around basketball performance skill scores at post-intervention than participants receiving the relaxation intervention.
So to get into that evasive flow state and to go for gold, you might want to look deeply into my eyes. Or you might want to look at a screen. Hold on a second. A screen, the pariah of the modern age, the thing that we're constantly told sucks our life away from us, that's the thing that's supposed to get us into this state of ecstasy? Well, yeah. Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow has appeared in many places, from the boardroom to the living room, and one of the most important places is how it's influenced software designers. A whole lot of software designers, but none more than computer games developers. This is a computer game developed by a woman named Genova Chen called Flow. It was released in 2007 on the Sony PlayStation, but it had initially been part of her MFA. And what it does is this.
Flow is divided into 20 levels. Each level introduces new creatures with new challenges, and different from traditional games in which players have to complete one level in order to progress to the next one, Flow offers players power to control their gameplay progress. By choosing different food to eat, players can advance to the more difficult level and return to the easier level at any time. The game features a minimal death penalty. If player died in one level, he'll be pushed back to the previous level that's relatively easy. Players can also choose to avoid the challenge, skip the level, and come back later.
Genova explicitly exploited Csikszentmihalyi's theory of flow to tweak and fine-tune the game design of her flow, balancing the correct amount of skill with the correct amount of challenge. And this is the various ways that this has been represented in science. And she did it in a way that let the players themselves determine where they wanted to be, allowing them to avoid their own personal thresholds of boredom and anxiety. This is the enigmatic middle ground that computer games designers and software developers are seeking, that is at the core of Csikszentmihalyi's flow.
Designing a video game is very much about how to keep the player in the flow and eventually be able to finish the game. Therefore, the game system needs to maintain different players' experiences inside the flow zone.
Now, it's not just games that have this flow mentality, as I've alluded already. A team of researchers from Vanderbilt University in the US measured the experience of chatting in chat rooms or using search engines and also shopping online. And they found that those services, the ones that were the most compelling, also put users in a state of flow too.
Consumers who achieve flow on the web are so acutely involved in the act of online navigation that thoughts and perceptions not relevant to navigation are screened out, and the consumer focuses entirely on the interaction.
We become lost to the rest of the world. We are so deeply in a trance that we will follow the website's lead into a rabbit hole for hours, which I'm sure, of course, many of you have found yourself doing. And I also reckon that a good proportion of you would perhaps not admit it, but might think that Excel or Outlook is your favorite computer game. Mastering spreadsheets, of course, and emptying your inbox becomes far more difficult the better you get at it.
You can absolutely think of some of the tools in our lives as, if you like, broken games or games that we don't even know we're playing. When I think about email sometimes, a lot of unintended consequences are coded inside its setup. For a lot of people, from a certain angle, their working life is a little bit like a game called Empty the Inbox. But ironically, by emptying their inboxes, they're gradually filling up the inboxes of everybody else in the world. The bias in email is to send more email.
That was an author named Tom Chatfield. I interviewed him in that particular clip for the radio series Digital Human that I present. And the game of email that he describes is absolutely compelling. It's hypnotic, even. And the feeling of satisfaction that you get from emptying your inbox or creating a complex spreadsheet that actually works, really difficult. That's exactly part of the design of the systems. Activities that are done through digital services are, of course, designed to be compelling. They're designed to get you into a flow state, into a trance where you feel motivated to continue because your skill is matched by that challenge. The people who are designing these things want us to be compelled. We are convinced by the technology that emptying the inbox is what it is that we want to do. We're convinced that we want to stay in front of the computer to look at our screens. We're convinced that the best way to interact with our friends and our families is by posting status updates and putting pictures up on Facebook, or with work colleagues by connecting on LinkedIn. See, once again, we're intrinsically motivated, perhaps not to kill someone or to take over the world, but nevertheless, using the same psychological techniques, these things are being built into the apps and services that we use every day. What they're building, however, is not agnostic. They may be taking advantage of our flow state to inadvertently implant some of their own biases. So, take a good old example, The Sims. A simulation, a fantastical fantasy simulation of the real world. Get a job, raise a family, buy a house, fill it with mid-century modern furniture. Perhaps that's my fantasy, but anyway. This is the basis of the game. It's to succeed in one kind of life. It's not to set up a market stall in Accra, Ghana, or to open up an internet cafe for poor gay neighborhood kids in an Ebola-racked city. There are, of course, alternatives to the capitalist heteronormative life experience, but by flowing through the Sims' reward and punishment trance, we're learning that this is actually how we want life to be. Aspiration, reflection, a privileged Western sensibility. Okay, Fair enough. That's The Sims, but we should think about where games and other software is coming from to understand that what we're seeing is the world through a very specific point of view. Because remember, most people's jobs is not to do email, right? In fact, the email flow state interrupts every other flow state. Ping, oh right, I'll just answer that. It'll just take me a sec. Oh, 5 hours later, I haven't done that thing that I needed to do. If you find yourself going home after a day at the office satisfied because you emptied your inbox, but your job is actually to do something else, you're probably entranced by the email-based flow. Hey, we've all been there. So, when you return to your desks on Monday, think carefully about every activity that you find yourself performing as part of your work duties. Are you doing it because it's useful and productive and it's the right thing to do for the business, or because you're fascinated by the mesmerizing eyes of the designers, and now you're fixated on winning the game?
Don't you rest when you want to go to rest.